All right, now we're going to transition to our next interviewee, which is my friend, Joe Tippetts. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Hi there.
Okay?
Yes, everything's good on my end. I can see you and I can hear you. So
Cool.
a little bit of background, a short bio from Joe. Joe was raised in the church and then left the church for 7 years actually and got rebaptized last year. He has a blog, I believe, or you do blog on Medium, right?
I write things from time to time. I wouldn't call it being a blogger yet, but
but it's out there. Yep. Excellent. Yeah, and he has a really fantastic perspective, I think, on God. From the things that I read from him, I watched one of his interviews that he did recently with John DeLynn, and watched part of it because it was 6 hours long. So if anyone has an extra 6 hours, it's a great thing to go check out maybe. And he has shared this journey with his wife Mindy and their 4 kids. So welcome, Joe. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yep. So we're going to start out this interview the same way that we started some of the other ones. First, just kind of starting out with the first question, which is about a fork in a road. So we talked about how sometimes some choices lead us away from the gospel and some lead us back to it. You have a unique experience because you took both of those roads, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your experience and kind of how you navigated those two separate times in your life?
Yeah, and when I saw that question, I thought there's hundreds of forks. I thought of all kinds of circumstances where, and I think that continues long term, that we're always making choices that lead us toward goodness or away from it. Mm-hmm. And I use the word goodness not being the same as the church or even God, because I think it's bigger than that. But 3 forks that came to mind that were pretty central. One is when I stopped believing God was good. Mm-hmm. And I had been raised to believe in a loving God, a good God, a God that couldn't go wrong. But I had also been raised to believe that leaders of the church were kind of proxies for God. And I think I took that too far. When things are going well for you in the church, it's easy to intermingle words like the gospel or God or prophets and kind of see them all as close to synonymous. But when you're struggling, and you're hearing messages like, if you're just a little more exact in your obedience, then you can have a blessing. And it creates this chasm in your mind where you're hungering, you need God badly, and you're not feeling God, and you believe it's just your fault. And then God starts to feel like this crazy maniac who mm-hmm. is a trickster, who, if you would have tried just a little bit harder, if you would have read a few more scriptures, if you would have gone to the temple a little more exact in your obedience, then you can earn God's love. And then you can earn that connection that we're promised at baptism. And every week when we take the sacrament, the idea of having that Spirit and the fruits of the Spirit in our lives. So I came to a point where I had been seeking God for, it had been years, and he just felt absent. This wasn't a day or a week or a month. This was years. And I started truly believing that God must be a big jerk. And when you get to that point, you can either keep believing in a God that you think is bad, but the next step is to just believe God is made up. And you go from being angry to indifferent. Mm-hmm. And the anger is cyclical. It lasts for a long time, and it comes in spurts. And, you get mad at God, and then you repent, and then you feel bad and think, oh, no, I can't even, I've alienated God worse because of my sin of being mad at him. And it creates this cycle that that makes God impossible, feel like God is impossible to reach. And so, you know, that fork, I think, culminated over time with me just not believing in God.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never say I was an atheist, like I knew God didn't exist, but I would always phrase it something like, if I had to bet $100 on it, I would say there's no God. But I leave the possibility open, but I was pretty sure there was not a God, that God was just made up by people to control other people. So that's the first fork that came to mind. A second one is similar, and it's that shift from trusting leaders, church leaders, prophets, to trusting myself. And that can go to, you know, there's extremes on that. You know, that can be a form of pride where you don't trust the wisdom of others all around you, and you just trust your own experience. And on one extreme, that can be negative in that you don't benefit from the wisdom of people all around you. But I really believe that it's a common thing in our church for people early on to learn to stop seeking God for themselves because they feel like they have the conference talks, so that's been done for them. You know, the old quote that Brigham Young said, that he fears the people are going to
be too trusting and not ask God. And, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you look at what leaders say, it's always this idea of, it's like a line, there's 2 points. You know, there's a leader says something, but you have the right to have a confirmation. And that can be a tricky teaching when you feel like you always have to, in the end, agree with a leader or you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And so that shift, spending years out of the church, it sounds weird, but I feel like I needed it. I feel like it was good for me because it was like I could reset certain mentalities that I had that were so deeply ingrained within me that it was, I don't know if I could have ever changed the mindset staying in the church, because I would have felt so subject to the mentality that I had been raised with. And I don't say that as blaming to my parents or anything, because they raised me in a very loving way and the ward, but being able to trust your own conscience, even if sometimes there's discomfort. You know, maybe a leader says something and the old me would have said, okay, whatever you think, drop it. Your new opinion is what the leader just said, because you're that good of a member.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now I'm much more inclined to feel like I have a right to evaluate that. And the scriptures talk about wrestling with God. You don't, if you just agree with everything and give up your ability to think about things for yourself, that's not wrestling, that's a forfeit. And so I think there is value in that wrestle. But the third fork in the road came last year, very unexpectedly. I had formally resigned 5 years previous, and I hadn't been going to church for 7 years. And time's short here, so I won't go into very many details, but out of the blue, I had an experience that, for me, I interpreted it as God is there and God is love. And I felt like he wanted me to come back to this church. And that fork in the road, I know how it feels it's like a bad divorce when you leave the church. And there's a lot of negative feelings, and it's easy to, you're very critical. A lot of us that left the church stay very plugged into conversations about the church. But most of those are just conversations that are very critical, pointing out everything that's wrong. But when I rediscovered that God was there and that overpowering sense of total love, it showed me that there's more to, there's kind of the message that if you keep the commandments, then you get blessed. One comes before the other.
Yeah, the transactional God. Yep.
Yeah, where you kind of earn grace. Mm-hmm. you do after all you can do, then the grace comes in, but you better have done everything you could do. And if not, then the grace won't come because you didn't earn it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to try to contradict that message. I just think it's part of a spectrum where there are other experiences in our lives where you can feel like you've been given something so freely and you didn't earn it and you weren't even trying to find it and it just came to you and it's so powerful. You can look like an idiot to a lot of the people you've been in, outside of the church in that world with, and you're at a bar drinking and you're talking about all the weird stuff at the church. And then suddenly you're the guy that went back. I'm talking about myself.
Yeah. I wondered.
And you're kind of a weirdo. People are trying to figure out how to process it because they trust you. You have a relationship. And so, the most sincere and honest thing I could do is follow it. Not because I didn't think, or not because I felt like it suddenly within my heart and mind, all the problems of the church just went away. It was in spite of that. I'm working on getting the restoration of blessings. When you get rebaptized, you wait at least 1 year, and then it's kind of up to your bishop to evaluate where you're at, and so that's something I'm working on here as I'm coming up on 1 year this month. Wow. And I was having a discussion with my bishop. I don't think this was, I think he might be listening. This, I don't think I'm giving away something that's private. But we were just talking about that notion of, he asked something to the effect of if I believe in Revelation. And I said, I do, but I think it's messy. I think it gets mixed up with all our desires and with all our hopes. And so often, 10 years after you may have been 100% certain of something, you see it with more experience. And and so sometimes hindsight is the only way you can truly know if something was really truth in your life. But I said, well, I don't always think, I don't necessarily think everything the church says and does and has done is explainable and perfect and good. The beauty of the commitment isn't that you put on blinders and pretend everything's good. It's the fact that we agree to sustain leaders knowing that we're all weak. And one day you might be the leader and you know all your own weaknesses, and another day it might be me, and another day it's another neighbor. And we're just regular Joes, in this church. And the beauty isn't finding a way to make it all add up so that it all seems perfect and consistent. The beauty is saying, and I think where love comes in, is saying, yeah, there are problems and we're messy, and I'm still going to sustain you, at a local level, and I'm going to sustain these brethren at the top too, because that's part of a commitment we're making, and we all understand that we're not perfect. So that's kind of the third, that rediscovering God and that God is love. That was, I think, the third major fork.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So you're talking, I've been immersed in Joseph Smith for the past 6 months in preparation for this year, right? This event, we're here. And it just reminds me really of his experience of experiencing God. He talks about leaving his first vision and just being full, I apologize, there's a storm happening. Just being full of love and feeling that for a while, just like having this experience where God came to him and knew him and called him by name, and Joseph was filled with love. And I think about that a lot in my experience with God, because I think it's important that we find God's love. And I think another point that you made is that your time away from the church was necessary for you to feel that and for you to come back. I say that all the time because of experiences I've had with people who I've seen who needed that break, or who were in truly toxic situations, because we are human beings and we make mistakes, and sometimes we're really horrible to some people, and they need time away from the church. It's an important lesson to learn for us as members, because it's a part of this education that we're having on earth. It's a part of the plan of salvation to continue walking the straight and narrow path. Earlier in my interview with Fiona, she talked about how the straight and narrow is straight and narrow because it's just you and Jesus walking that path together. And straight doesn't mean straight, it just means small. And all of those powerful images for me, I think I'm really touched by your story. It's something that's very moving for me, and I appreciate you sharing it so openly. Now, the next question that we have kind of relates to our relationships with people of those who leave. I think you've touched on this a little bit, but when you have someone in your life that is a member of another faith, maybe they were never a member of the church, or maybe they leave the church, how can we strengthen those relationships? Because they're still a part of our heaven. They're still a part of our life. We can't just cut them off. So how do we handle these situations in our life?
Well, your question said, what is one idea? So
there you go. Yep. Let's do one then.
The one that I thought was most important is have a relationship. It sounds so simple, but when somebody, say you have a sibling or a child who starts expressing doubt, maybe you start seeing little comments, it progresses probably over a year or two, and you start seeing them inching away from the church in the way they're thinking. And the easiest thing to do at that point is to let fear kick in. And suddenly that person who you used to connect with, maybe on a weekly basis, maybe on a monthly basis, suddenly 6 months have gone by and you haven't interacted with them. Because the last time you did, it was uncomfortable because they wanted to talk about, something about Joseph Smith, or, something that made you feel attacked. This is especially hard for spouses because they're right there with you. They can't get away, but extended family, friends who, aren't the type of people you see every day, but you might interact with regularly, those all just kind of dry up. Almost all. Because especially when you leave and you're angry because you feel everybody judging you, there's this pattern. When you start expressing doubt, if you ask for help from a parent or a leader or a spouse, the first reaction is one of compassion. You're the lost sheep, and they're going to help you. But once you cross a line and they know you're not coming back, suddenly you become a wolf. You're not this helpless little sheep that needs compassion. You become this dangerous person who might spread bad ideas to their kids, and you become this dangerous person. And it's a really weird dynamic to experience as one who left and went through this, and to feel like you have dozens of friends right around you, and suddenly almost all of those dry up. But I want to tell about one person where that didn't dry up. And we're still really good friends today. But we started walking our dogs. We're both middle-aged and a little bit more than we should. And so we started walking our dogs early in the morning, and he would let me, this was early on when I needed to vent and I needed to talk to somebody who would just listen and who wouldn't try to contradict me and tell me, oh, there's a good answer for all this, and you just go to farms or whatever, and or not farms.
Fair Mormon. It used to be farms. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you go there, and when you're in that mindset, all of the answers feel ridiculous. And so to have a friend who could be confident enough in his faith to just let me, we would walk for about an hour, and 90% of the talking would be me just kind of venting and questioning, and looking back, I know I was saying things that made him feel uncomfortable, or like I wasn't showing respect because I was so caught up in my own emotions that I was trying to deal with. But I love that guy because he was with me. He was walking with me literally and figuratively when so many other people disappeared. And I would say, you know, back to the answer to that one way, when I said, just have a relationship. You know, if you need to, stick it in Siri, call Joe once a week for the next 10 years. You know, whatever it is that you need to do to remind yourself, make ways to reconnect, because when you just stop interacting with somebody who has left, their imagination takes over and you hate them because you're a judgmental, fearful Mormon who's just a sheep and doesn't want to face the truth.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot more that could be said about that in terms of respect, truly being able to respect people who choose to make different decisions instead of kind of condescendingly seeing them as a project that you're going to work on. But just be with those people. That's the start.
Yeah, that was really powerful for me. The other day I was thinking about 3rd Nephi 18. Everybody go read it. It's one of these scriptures that I keep going back to, where Jesus comes and people are talking about how people would come and take the sacrament in their congregations, but they were like wolves in sheep clothing. And when you said the word wolf, this reminded me of that, because Jesus, like 4 or 5 times after them bringing up this issue, keeps saying, and cast them not away. Don't cast them out. Let them come. Let them be with you. Love them. Minister to them. It says pray for them. And that for me is really emotional every time I read it, because that is what it's like. And I think it's maybe starting to change now, but when somebody questions or leaves the church, there is apprehension to that person. There's anger towards that person. There are feelings that I've had even in my own personal life. And the more space I have for those feelings, being with someone who doesn't believe those things or who has gone through that journey as well, it hurts me to see myself react that way. And I think that when we know the truth of all things at the end of all of this, and we look back and we see how we treated those people, how we cast them away, is indescribable for me, because it's something that even just a short period later, it hurts me. And it's something that I want to be different about. I can't imagine what it would be like knowing everything and knowing exactly how they felt. So thank you for sharing that so much. Just really, really good thoughts.
Whether you're the person who stays in the church or the one who leaves, we all make mistakes because it's a really emotionally fraught thing. And you make bad mistakes and you say things in emotion. The key is to just keep going back to each other and making it better, instead of just saying, oh, I really messed up with that person, I'm going to stop connecting because now I feel.
Yeah. Now we have one final question. You've been really thorough with these past 2 questions, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for all of your experiences.
Yeah, I'm never short on words.
Okay, so we'll do one more. And this is, again, from our Facebook feed, and it says, have you thought about why this experience happened when it did? what would you tell your friends and family to glean from your story? I'm not sure if they mean the experience of coming back to the church or your experience of leaving the church, but maybe you could address both. And then what are some lessons for people who know you?
I'll start with leaving because, you talked about the dynamic earlier where it's kind of taboo, the idea that somebody could leave the church and it could be the right thing for them to do seems wrong from a church perspective. And sometimes we're like helicopter parents that we're just hovering over each other and we don't want to let each other make any big mistake. And I think I would say to people, trust your inner voice. Be honest with yourself. And I know that can be hard sometimes when you have a lot of competing ideas in your head, but trust yourself. You don't have to outsource your conscience to somebody else. Maybe if you're 8, you can do that, but not if you're 25. And even if you need to go on a journey that maybe it takes you out of the church the rest of your life, but that's the risk you have to take, because when people are in the church and feeling like they're forced to be here because their wife is going to leave them or their mom's going to be disappointed or whatever, all the wrong reasons, when they stay for that, they aren't really there. And I don't know if my ward's different than other wards, but go ask your elders quorum president how ministering's going since it changed from home teaching to ministering. You'll find out that a lot of people are at church but aren't engaged. Their hearts aren't there. Whereas if people can be there because they really want to be there, and if they needed to go on a detour to realize that, we need to let them do that. Because if they feel forced to be there, that's our doctrine, that agency is central, and we can't really give our will to God unless we have our will to give. And so I would just say, don't be afraid of letting people make a mistake. God has a way of, when I came back, I had worried for years before I left that I was going to ruin my family. And now I have adult kids. Nobody's going on a mission. None of my kids go to church. But I love them, and I know they are great. And I don't fear about their future. And I think, love and fear don't mix, oil and water. And so I would just say, let people go on their journey and be there with them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your insights today. This has been a really emotional half hour for me, and I appreciate everything that you've had to say. I think that you have a really, really wonderful perspective, and I wish you all of the luck as you look more for that restoration of blessings. I have another friend going through that right now, and he has shared some of his experiences with me along the way, and it has been really humbling and powerful to watch how the atonement and how the love of God really works with people instead of just hearing about it. And I hope that you continue to have that connection. So thank you again for coming. You're amazing. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And again, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. It was very, very nice to talk to you this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel privileged to be here.